All right, Phillips. So you saw that I was doing some conversations around masculinity and disability, and you reached out and you said, "Hey, I'd be interested in having a conversation with you." What kind of sparked your interest when you saw that?
So yes, Nathan, you're correct. I reached out to you based on a previous interview that you did with somebody, and the reason why that topic was of interest is it is something that isn't really talked about too much, and I feel I have a different perspective, uh, like a bit different perspective than other people about that disability situation and many others. So I figured I would contact you and maybe we could talk about that and maybe other whatever you want to talk about. I definitely have an opinion.
All right, man. So are you a man with a disability?
Yes, I have a spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. Um, that means that my muscles are very tight and stiff. I was born with a premature birth, and it caused a brain injury. I had a brain bleed at birth, and so I'm in a manual wheelchair full time for mobility.
And so how has all of that impacted your view and your identity as a man?
Um, so I'm going to start with the more obvious sides of it. So I'm impaired in four of my limbs. And so that means I don't have average, I have less than average strength of somebody that is my age. I would say, so I'm 25. So I'm just saying I have less physical strength than the average able-bodied 25-year-old man. So physically, one could argue that I'm less of a man in some way. Uh, I disagree because for whatever you cannot do in life, whether you're disabled or not, whatever you cannot do or whatever you struggle with, there's always something else that has to get stronger to compensate for whatever you lack. So if I'm less of a man in a physical sense, uh, I've had to become more of a man in a intellectual, emotional sense. I have to wake up every day. I have to be disciplined with my nutrition, with my diet, with my routine of what I need to do disability wise, phone calls I have to make. Um, when I'm out in public, usually people are not exposed to cerebral palsy or really any disability. So there's always a lot of explaining. I have to be disciplined with my level of explaining of my disability and not act all pissed off when, excuse my language, sorry if I'm not allowed to curse, uh, act all pissed off when somebody, is asking me the same questions over and over again. I have to remember that everybody is different and I might be their first exposure or first quality exposure to disability. So I have a very important role to play as a man.
Yeah, man, I talk about the angry disabled person syndrome all the time. So I I relate to the idea of not being pissed off all the time. So with all that said, and how kind of disability has shaped your identity, what specifically does it mean to you? Like if you were going in and looking in the dictionary and you were writing your definition of what it is to be a man, what does that look like to you?
Being a man, I'm going to ignore the physical parts of it because that's more obvious. I'm going to go a little bit in a different direction than that. So I'm going to go in the direction of the level of emotional control that you have to have as a man, because let's just talk about if you don't have a disability, or if, if you have average strength. Men are usually stronger than women in the physical sense, but that doesn't mean that we can just freak out anytime something goes wrong. We have to control our strength and use it responsibly. So a big part of being a man, whether you're disabled or not, is controlling your emotions, especially when things are not going according to plan. And when you have a disability, things don't go according to plan, probably more often than they do go to plan. So what I just told you and your viewers, it applies to me and most people in my situation on a daily basis.
Yeah, man. What do you think is the hardest part about being a man with a disability?
So I'm also gonna bring my age into it. So I'm 25 years old. So in society's sense, a young 25-year-old man is a prime candidate for, a physical labor position like construction, HVAC, plumbing. Because we're supposed to be physically strong at this age, and that's the primary usefulness of a young man. Obviously, because I'm impaired in 4 limbs, I'm not very physical, mobile. So I have to make up for that by being more communicative, talking more articulately, and just being able to speak with more intelligence than the average person my age. Not to say that people my age don't speak intelligently. I'm just saying that, going back to my first point, whenever something is not right in one way, there's always a counterbalance. And that's how we all survive our whole life with a disability.
100%. So that's kind of physicality, and that is kind of one thing that society puts a big focus on. What's one message you think that you might be getting wrong about being a man with a disability and masculinity?
Something I might be getting wrong. So my opinions, I'm relatively young, so my opinions could change over the next few years. But right now, what I'm getting wrong, if you had to call it that, I would say that being a man is somewhat attached to how much money you have, money or resources. I feel I could be getting that wrong, but at the same time, I'm not completely convinced that I'm wrong about that. But I could be going in that direction of maybe I'm getting that wrong.
And yeah, so it could be something, and maybe wrong isn't necessarily the phrase to use, but it's something that is very heavily right now attached to the identity that you have as being a man.
So I understand what you mean. Honestly, maybe we'll get into it as this conversation goes. But I've actually evolved as a man in a good way in the last, I would say, 3 years, possibly 2 years. So I'm in the best place I've ever been as my status as a man with a disability, and I've improved in a number of different ways. We can go into that if you like, but I feel I understand your question, but I feel like I'm a good version of myself at the moment, and so I don't feel like anything is wrong at the moment, and it's hard to explain how I got to this process, but we could probably talk about it if you like.
Yeah. So if you could think about one thing that played a major role into you getting to this point that you're speaking into right now, what do you think that would be?
Oh, that's an easy answer. That would be since I was a child, my parents, family members, doctors, therapists, they never sugarcoated or even lied, never ever lied or sugarcoated about anything related to my disability. And so that did a tremendous good service for my future because on one level, it made me more aware of my medical problems to try to prevent certain things from happening. But even more important than that, that helped me trust myself and what was going on. For instance, if I have hip pain, I can trust myself that I really do have hip pain. It's not like somebody. I would say I would call it medical gaslighting. That's just a term I made up. There's a lot of medical gaslighting with pediatric disability patients, and people aren't doing anything harmful. They're not trying to be harmful when they're doing this. They think they're doing the right thing by teaching somebody to ignore their problems or not let it bother them. But in the long run, and even the short run, it actually makes the problems much more factorable in life.
What do you think, like, in your experience, what's one of the hardest things when it comes to asking for help or reaching out? What makes that hard and what would make that easier?
So asking for help when you have any level of disability, it's gonna be part of your life or anyone's life. The hard part about it is when we were young, we were trained. I use the word trained. Maybe you could use a different word if you like. But we were trained to be as independent as we possibly could, even if that means that we struggled. And so it's hard to distinguish. It could be hard for someone to distinguish what is something that you could try to do versus something you could ask for help. It really comes down to what is your tolerance for struggle, and what are your priorities. So that answer is going to be different for everybody.
I really like how you frame that in what is your tolerance for struggle. And I think we can have a really high tolerance for struggle, kind of based on what you said about we've been trained for some of these things to show up, and so it seems like our normal, and even if we have a high tolerance for struggle, it doesn't mean that we have to allow it to get to that maximum. I love that idea of the tolerance for struggle.
And along those lines, I would also say everyone has a different pain tolerance. So that's a similar ideology that we could talk about that impacts somebody's lifestyle. What is your level of pain tolerance and struggle tolerance?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100% there. If you were gonna go back and, like, let's say somebody knocks on your door there and you go open it up, see who it is, and it's a younger version of you. It's young Philip. What's one thing you would want to make sure that he understood from the experience that you have now?
That's an easy answer, actually. So as you can tell from this interview, I have a speech impediment as a result of my disability is. The medical term is dysarthria, so speech difficulty. So if you're a child with a speech impediment, you might think that because you have a speech impediment that you're supposed to be talking less or being more passive would be acceptable because you have a speech impediment, but it's quite the opposite. If you have a speech impediment or trouble speaking, you need to speak up more often so that you practice speaking with more clarity, and also you're helping the rest of society get used to your way of speaking and, in some sense, the way of speaking of everybody with your particular disability.
That is some really good, poignant advice there. Who is a man that you admire and why?
So everyone says their father, stepfather, and I would agree with that, but that's a cliche answer. So I'm going to go a little bit in a different direction. No disrespect to my father or stepfather, but that's the answer everyone gives. So I'm going to give the answer of there was disabled men. His name, but one in particular, his name is Ryan Martin. He's a former professional wheelchair basketball player, born with spina bifida, and I always respected his way of carrying himself because he never sugarcoated anything. He's still alive, so should be talking like he's in the prison, but he never lied. He said, disabled people are at risk for obesity, cardiovascular disease, that your level of disability might make your life harder than others. He never sugarcoated or lied about anything, similar to an earlier point that I made. So that always stuck with me, and I really respect that advice, and I try to apply that in my everyday life and when I get a chance to influence others.
If you had one message for other disabled men right now, what is that message?
So I would say don't focus on your disability as much as you might say, well, why do they say don't focus on your disability when all my other answers before was about focusing on your disability? When I say don't focus on your disability, I mean, let's talk about in a job sense. If you're getting some employment, your job is to make sure you're good at your job or your career field. It's not about your disability. Of course, there's ADA accommodations and this and that, but if I'm being totally honest, it comes down to, can you do the job or can you not do the job? So I think people spend too much time trying to figure out what kind of accommodations they need, but really it's just, can you do it or can you not do it? So if we face reality, some people have more or less options than other people, but that's just the nature of the game, and I would focus on doing what you can. And the same applies to dating or friendships as well. Focus on being a good boyfriend, a good friend. It's not really about your disability, and nobody really is gonna have any pity or anything like that, and we don't want that anyway. So it's just about being the best version of yourself and bringing something to the table. And when you're able to help other people, because usually when you're disabled, we're the ones receiving the help. But the truth is, we can help other people as well, maybe just in a different way than it's customary, but we can still help other people. So I would say focus on your value, that could mean in a money sense, I'm not gonna lie, but really value could be just what you offer to other people to bring meaning to their life.
So I love how you ended that, because my next question is then I want to know, I want you to speak directly into the camera, and what is it that you bring to the table?
So I'm gonna leave the money aspect out because that's cliche. Everyone says, "Oh, bring money," but my attributes as a man that are helpful to someone is I know how to speak, uh, very assertive, and I can give thorough answers to questions. And when I have a question, I'm also skilled at questioning the world around me. So those are assertive man qualities. I also know um, how to persuade and argue my points, and that's a good quality for someone to have. And in terms of my qualities that I bring to like a dating or friendship sense, I'm a loyal person, and I always focus on how can I help someone else, because when I help someone else, in some sense, I'm actually helping myself, because in order to help someone else, you have to be at a certain level of function. So helping someone else actually increases your own level of function. For able bodies as well, but particularly, uh, I'm a disabled man, so I noticed that that's a very big factor in my life.
And I got one last question for you, and that question is, what do you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered for someone that tried to uh, make life better for people with disabilities. No disrespect to any disabled people with disabilities, but people say, "Oh, I'm a disabled advocate." The term disability advocate, it gets thrown around a little too loosely. First, if you want to call anyone a disabled advocate, you have to define what are they advocating for, and what are their methods to advocate. And I think that people aren't. There's very few disability advocates, if we're being totally truthful. And I want to be remembered for a person that makes sacrifices and might have to do things alone and face more rejection than is typical, because I'm trying to create opportunities for myself and for other people. But part of that process is enduring the pain and the difficulty of different forms of rejection, because I'm trying to create things that aren't there for us at the moment. And we can go down a rabbit hole about what I'm talking about, but that's the summary of it.
Do want to dive into that just a little bit. When you think about, if you were successful in bringing one thing that you feel like isn't there for disabled men right now to life, what would that be?
So I pay attention to a lot of online disability forums, and I'm also around. I've also had good opportunity to be around disabled men, and I think that we all struggle with what I call touch deficits, where we don't. Not only do we not have a lot of opportunity or success with women, but we don't get human touch. Even starting from being a child with a disability, we probably get less human touch of any sort than compared to our able-bodied counterparts. So we have to, so we can acknowledge that truth, but we have to take responsibility for that and try to create our own opportunities. For example, I go to speed dating events, local in my city, in my area, and I'm always the only one in a wheelchair, the only man in a wheelchair, but usually the only person in a wheelchair in general, and probably the only disabled person there. But if all these disabled guys are lonely, according to the internet and in my surroundings, why aren't these speed dating events? Why aren't they packed with disabled men? If we say that it's such a big problem, then we need to take responsibility. Because that is part of being a man, is taking responsibility for trying to fix your problems. It doesn't always mean that you're going to be able to fix your problems, but you have to at least try.
And hey, I love that. Why isn't it packed with disabled men? I love that, man. I really like that. That's one of the things that you are striving to support with.
And I want to just add another comment related to that. And the vision I see for why I think more disabled men should be at like a speed dating event, for example, is, let's say a woman, she's just not into me and she rejects me. Maybe it's because of my disability, or maybe it's not because of my disability, or maybe it's a combination. But regardless of what the reasoning was, I did a service by her putting it in a seed in her mind that another disabled man might ask her out at a later time. So even though she rejected me, she might not reject the other man with a disability, and vice versa. A different disabled man could get rejected, but then she talks to me and I'm not rejected because we desensitized the woman or anyone in public to get used to being around disabled people. People just honestly don't know what to do with us because there's not many of us. We're a minority group, but even more serious than that, we need to be out in public, even when it's not fully accessible or we don't think that we belong there. We need to actually show up anyway so that we can start to improve things in a certain direction, but nothing's going to change if we're locked in our house all the time.
Amen to that. Amen. Yeah, man. Is there anything before we end our conversation that you want to speak into that maybe I didn't ask a question for, or is there a question that you wish more people would ask you about, but they just don't?
Oh, I like that question. What is a question that somebody should ask, but they just don't? I think it's just very simple. You can ask me, why am I in a wheelchair, or why can't I walk, or why do I have difficulty speaking with my speech? Just trying to learn more about my situation. Now, I'll be honest, and I'm a little bit critical of men with disabilities. This is probably more applies to the acquired disabilities, people that got disabled later in life. There are people that do ask, and they get a bitter response. Oh, why are you asking me? Oh, this and that, and we can't reply like that. If somebody asks you a question, it doesn't matter if it's your employer, the woman that you want to date, or anyone else. Everyone has a valuable reason why they're asking you these kind of questions, and it's up to us to respond in an accurate, articulate, and not bitter way. So I would want to draw attention to that aspect of socializing.
Yeah, man. And I think it's through having conversations like that even the thought of, hey, is that a way that I normally respond? Because let's be honest, people are going to respond in that way because of the stories that they've created, because of the experiences that they've had. But the only way to actually do something different is to have an awareness. And as you said in a lot of your answers today, taking responsibility for how we show up in the world. But we can only do that once we recognize what we're doing, for sure. I truly appreciate you coming on and appreciate you sharing parts of your story with us. And I know all your stuff will be tagged down below. So if anybody wants to get in contact with you, they'll be able to do that. And I just want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Nathan, for having me. It means a lot that you invited me on your show, and I'm glad we were able to get together.